Tony Rodriguez never believed in luck. At 34, he'd spent most of his life fixing other people's broken cars. In the small desert town of Clearwater, Nevada, his own life felt just as broken. Bills piled up on his kitchen table. His ex-wife had left him 2 years ago, taking their dog and half his savings most nights. He worked until 10 o'clock just to make ends meet. That Tuesday evening in March 2019 started like any other. Tony was closing up his small auto repair shop when old Mrs. Chen came by with her ancient Toyota. The car was making strange noises again. He spent an extra hour under the hood, getting grease on his already dirty coveralls. By the time he finished, it was past 11. The drive home took him through 20 miles of empty desert road. Tony had made this trip thousands of times. He knew every curve, every bump, every roadside cactus. That's why the bright flash in the sky caught his attention immediately. It wasn't lightning. The sky was clear, filled with stars. This light was different. It moved like a falling star, but much slower and bigger. Tony pulled over and stepped out of his beat-up truck. The light was getting brighter, coming down fast somewhere behind the hills. Then he heard it, a sound like thunder, but deeper. It shook the ground under his feet. Whatever was happening, it was happening close. He should have driven home. He should have minded his own business. But Tony had always been curious. Maybe too curious for his own good. He grabbed his flashlight from the truck and started walking toward the sound. The desert at night was cold and full of shadows. Tony's flashlight beam danced across rocks and scrub brush. As he climbed over a small hill, what he saw on the other side made him stop breathing. There was a crater in the ground, maybe 30 feet wide. Steam rose from the center, but that wasn't the strangest part. In the middle of the crater sat something that definitely wasn't from Earth. It looked like a pod or small ship, about the size of a car, but shaped like a teardrop. The metal was smooth and dark, not like anything Tony had ever seen. His hands were shaking as he climbed down into the crater. The object was warm to the touch. There were no visible doors or windows, but one side had a large crack running down its length. Strange blue light leaked out from inside. Tony pressed his face to the crack and peered in. That's when he saw him. The being inside was about his size, but clearly not human. His skin had a pale, almost translucent quality that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. His arms and legs were longer than they should be, and his fingers ended in what looked like small points. His face was similar to a human's, but with larger eyes that were closed. He wasn't moving. Tony's first thought was to run. His second was to call the police, but something stopped him. The being looked hurt, maybe dying. There was some kind of dark fluid around his head that might have been blood. Tony had seen enough injured animals to recognize pain, even on an alien face. He spent 10 minutes trying to figure out how to get inside the ship. Finally, he found a section of the crack that was wide enough. He squeezed through, cutting his jacket on the metal edges. The inside of the ship was unlike anything he'd ever imagined. The walls seemed to glow with their own light. There were no buttons or controls that he could recognize, just smooth surfaces covered in symbols that moved and shifted when he looked at them. The being was lying on what might have been a bed or control surface. Up close, Tony could see he was breathing, but very slowly. His eyes opened as Tony approached. They were large and dark, like looking into deep water at night. Those eyes showed fear at first, then confusion. The being tried to sit up but couldn't. He made sounds that might have been words, but in no language Tony had ever heard. "Hey, it's okay," Tony said softly, the way he talked to scared animals. "I'm not going to hurt you." The being stared at him for a long moment. Then, somehow, Tony heard words in his head. Not with his ears, but in his mind. The voice was calm and gentle. "You are not like the others I have observed." Tony almost fell backward. "You're talking to me. In my head. I am dying." The voice continued. "My ship is broken. I cannot return home." Without thinking, Tony reached out and touched the being's arm. The skin was cool and smooth, like polished stone. "Maybe I can help. I'm good with broken things." The being's large eyes studied Tony's face. Why would you help me? You do not know me. It was a good question. Tony thought about it as he looked around the damaged ship. He could call the government. There were probably people who would pay millions for what he'd found. But looking at this hurt creature, those options felt wrong. Because you need help. Tony said simply, and I can't just leave you here to die. Over the next hour, Tony managed to carefully lift the being out of the ship. He was lighter than expected. Maybe because of his longer, thinner bones, Tony carried him back to his truck. Wrapping him in an old blanket from behind the seat, the drive back to town was the longest. 20 minutes of Tony's life. The being drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally speaking in Tony's mind. He learned that his name was something like Zephyr in human sounds. He came from a place very far away, farther than Tony could imagine. Tony's repair shop had a small apartment above it where he sometimes slept when he worked late. It seemed like the safest place to take his unusual patient. He carried Zephyr upstairs and laid him on the old couch for the next 3 days. Tony barely left the apartment. He called in sick to his regular customers and spent his time trying to figure out how to help an alien recover from injuries he didn't understand. Zephyr's body seemed to be healing itself, but very slowly. During those long hours, they talked. Zephyr explained that he was a scout, sent to observe human civilization from a distance. His ship had malfunctioned during what should have been a routine mission. He'd been watching Earth for months, fascinated by human behavior. Your species is very different from mine, Zephyr said during one of their conversations. You feel things more deeply. You make decisions with your hearts, not just your minds. Is that good or bad? Tony asked. It is why I am alive, Zephyr replied. Another human might have called your authorities. You chose to help instead. By the end of the first week, Zephyr could sit up and move around the small apartment. His injuries were healing, but he explained that his ship was too damaged to repair. He was stranded on Earth, probably forever. Tony realized that his life had changed completely. He now had a secret that could change the world. More importantly, he had a friend unlike any he'd ever imagined. Someone who saw the universe in ways that made Tony's problems seem small, and his possibilities seem endless. As they sat together that first Sunday morning, watching the sunrise through the apartment window, Tony knew there was no going back. Whatever happened next, he would protect Zephyr's secret. He would help his new friend find a way to survive in a world that wasn't his own. Neither of them knew that. This was just the beginning of a friendship that would change both their lives forever. 3 months had passed since that night in the desert. Tony's life had completely changed, but nobody else knew it. To everyone in Clearwater, he was still the same guy who fixed their cars and kept to himself. They had no idea that an alien from another world was living in the apartment above his shop. Zephyr was getting stronger every day. His strange injuries had healed completely, and he could move around normally now. The hardest part was teaching him to look more human. Tony bought him regular clothes from the thrift store, and they spent hours practicing how to walk and talk. Like a regular person, you stand straight, Tony would say. Watching Zephyr move around the apartment, humans slouch a little. We're lazy. Zephyr would try to copy Tony's casual posture, but it looked awkward on his tall frame. Your species has poor posture habits, he'd reply, which always made Tony laugh. Learning to eat human food was another challenge. Zephyr's digestive system could handle most things, but everything tasted strange to him. He especially hated anything sweet. Tony found this hilarious because Zephyr would make a face like he was eating poison whenever he tried chocolate. But the biggest challenge was learning to be around other people. Tony couldn't keep Zephyr hidden forever. Eventually, people would start asking questions about why Tony was always at his shop, why he never went out anymore. The first test came when Betty Williams, who ran the diner across the street, brought over a plate of her famous apple pie. She'd been doing this for Tony ever since his divorce, trying to cheer him up with food. Tony, honey, you've been working too hard, she said, walking into the shop without knocking like she always did. I made extra pie and thought you might want some. Tony panicked. Zephyr was upstairs, and Betty had a habit of making herself at home. That's really nice, Betty, but I'm super busy right now. Nonsense, she said, already heading toward the stairs. I'll just put this in your kitchen. Tony quickly stepped in front of her. Actually, I have a friend staying with me. He's not feeling well, so maybe we should keep it quiet. Betty's eyes lit up with curiosity. A friend? Tony Rodriguez, you didn't tell me you had company? I should meet him. Before Tony could stop her, Zephyr appeared at the top of the stairs. Tony had coached him for this moment, but his heart still raced. Zephyr was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and his hair was messy in a very human way. Hello, Zephyr said, using the slight accent Tony had taught him. I am Zeph, Tony's cousin from New Mexico. Betty studied him carefully. New Mexico, you're awfully tall for Tony's family. Different side of the family, Tony said quickly. Zeph's been helping me with some of the more complicated repairs. This was actually true. Zephyr had an incredible understanding of how machines worked. He could look at an engine and immediately know what was wrong with it. He'd helped Tony fix 3 cars that week that he normally would have had to send to the dealership. Well, it's nice to meet you, Zeph, Betty said, though she still looked curious. You have very unusual eyes. Tony held his breath. Zephyr's eyes were larger than normal and had an unusual depth to them. But Zephyr just smiled. Thank you. I get that a lot. After Betty left, Tony collapsed into a chair. That was too close. She suspects something, Zephyr said. Betty suspects everything. She's the town gossip. But I think we're okay. Over the next few weeks, more people met Zeph. Tony introduced him as a distant cousin who was great with electronics. This wasn't a lie. Zephyr had somehow improved Tony's diagnostic computer, his electric tools, and even his old radio. Everything worked better when Zephyr touched it. How do you do that? Tony asked one evening, watching Zephyr fix a customer's car stereo just by holding it. Your technology is very primitive, Zephyr explained, but it follows the same basic principles as our machines. I can sense the energy patterns and adjust them. Tony was fascinated by everything Zephyr told him about his home world. It was a place called Kepler-442b, which Tony learned was a real planet that human scientists had discovered. Zephyr's people had been watching Earth for hundreds of years. Studying human civilization from a distance, we are explorers, Zephyr explained one night as they sat on the shop's roof, looking at the stars. We travel to different worlds and learn about other forms of life. But we have strict rules about not interfering. And you broke the rules by talking to me? I broke the rules by crashing, Zephyr said sadly. I was never supposed to make contact. My people probably think I am dead. Tony felt terrible for his friend. Don't you have family back home? People who miss you? Zephyr was quiet for a long moment. I have a mate. Her name is Lyra. We were bonded before I left for this mission. She believes I am dead. The sadness in Zephyr's voice made Tony's chest hurt. Maybe we can figure out a way to contact her. Let her know you're alive. It is not possible. My ship's communication system was destroyed in the crash, and even if I could reach her, I cannot return home. My people would not risk coming to Earth to rescue me. They sat in silence for a while, both thinking about love and loss. Tony understood loneliness. His ex-wife had left him because she said he was too boring, too predictable. But at least she was still alive somewhere. Zephyr's mate thought he was dead. Tell me about her, Tony said finally. Zephyr's expression softened. She is brilliant, much smarter than me. She works with what you would call energy healing. She can help injured people recover faster just by touching them. Sounds like she's special. She is. We were going to start a family when I returned from this mission. Zephyr looked up at the stars. Now she will choose another mate, and I will never see her again. Tony wanted to say something comforting, but what could he say? There were no words for that kind of lost dot as the months passed. Tony and Zephyr became closer than brothers. They worked together during the day and talked for hours at night. Zephyr learned about human emotions, human dreams, and human pain. Tony learned about the universe, about other worlds, and about his own planet from an outsider's perspective. Your species is remarkable. Zephyr said one evening, you feel everything so deeply. Love, friendship, sadness, hope. My people are more logical, more controlled. We do not experience emotions the way you do. Is that better or worse? Tony asked. I used to think it was better, Zephyr replied. But living with you has taught me that feeling deeply is what makes life meaningful. Even pain is valued because it shows how much you care. Tony's business was doing better than ever. Word had spread that he could fix anything, and customers came from towns 50 miles away. Nobody questioned his success or his quiet cousin, who helped with the complicated repairs. But Tony noticed that Zephyr seemed sadder as time went on. He tried to hide it, but Tony could see the loneliness in his friend's eyes. Zephyr was trapped between two worlds, belonging to neither. One night, as they watched the stars together, Tony made a decision. We're going to find a way to contact your people, even if it's just to let Lyra know you're alive. Zephyr shook his head. It is impossible. You said your people have been watching Earth for hundreds of years. That means they're still out there, still paying attention. We just need to get their attention. How? Tony smiled. I don't know yet, but I'm good at fixing impossible things. Neither of them knew that this conversation would change everything, or that the solution would come from a direction they never expected. 2 years had passed since that night in the desert. Tony's life had settled into a comfortable routine with Zephyr, who everyone in town now knew as his cousin Zeph from New Mexico. The auto shop was busier than ever, and Tony had even hired a part-time helper to keep up with all the work. But Tony started noticing changes in his friend. Zephyr moved slower in the mornings. His skin, which had always had that strange pale glow, was becoming duller. Sometimes Tony caught him staring at nothing, his large eyes unfocused and sad. You feeling okay, buddy? Tony asked one morning, watching Zephyr struggle to lift a car battery that he normally could handle easily. I am fine, Zephyr replied, but Tony could hear the weakness in his voice. Tony wasn't buying it. He'd learned to read his friend's moods over the past 2 years. Come on, Zeph, talk to me. What's going on? Zephyr sat down heavily on a workbench. My body is failing, Tony. Living on Earth is slowly killing me. The words hit Tony like a punch to the stomach. What do you mean? My people are not meant to live on your planet for extended periods. The atmosphere, the gravity, the distance from my home star, all of it is wearing down my biological systems. Tony felt panic rising in his chest. How long do you have? Perhaps 6 months, maybe less. Tony stared at his friend, trying to process this information. The thought of losing Zephyr felt impossible. There has to be something we can do. Maybe we can fix your ship or find a way to contact your people. Zephyr shook his head sadly. The ship is beyond repair, and even if we could contact my people, they would not risk coming to Earth. The exposure to your government would be too dangerous. Over the next few days, Tony watched his friend getting weaker. Zephyr tried to hide it, but Tony could see the change. He moved carefully, like an old man. His appetite was gone. Sometimes he would just sit and stare out the window. 4 hours. It was during one of these quiet moments that Zephyr made an announcement that shocked Tony completely. I need to tell you something important, Zephyr said one evening as they sat in the apartment. I have not been entirely honest with you. Tony looked up from the TV. What do you mean? I told you I was stranded here with no way to contact my people. That was true when I first arrived, but it is not true anymore. Tony's heart jumped. You can contact them. Why didn't you tell me? Because I chose not to, Zephyr said quietly. I chose to stay here with you rather than ask for rescue. But why? You could go home. You could see Lyra again. Zephyr was quiet for a long moment. Tony, in my culture, we do not form deep friendships the way humans do. We have companions, work partners, family bonds. But what you and I have created is something my people rarely experience. Tony didn't know what to say. You saved my life. Zephyr continued. You gave me a home, a purpose, a reason to keep living. I have never felt more alive than I have these past 2 years. Going home would mean leaving all of that behind. But you're dying here, Tony said. His voice cracking. Double quotes, yes. But I am dying happy. Tony felt tears in his eyes. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You need to contact your people. You need to go home. It is too late for that now. My body is too weak for space travel. But there is something else I must tell you. Zephyr stood up and walked to a box he kept hidden in the closet. Tony had never asked what was in it, respecting his friend's privacy. Now Zephyr opened it and pulled out what looked like a small, flat device. This is a communication device. Zephyr said, I have been using it to send messages to Lyra. Tony's mouth fell open. She knows you're alive. Yes, I told her about you, about this place, about how you saved me. She has been preparing for a journey to Earth. She's coming here. She arrived 3 days ago. Tony stared at his friend. What? Lyra is already on Earth. She used our advanced technology to create human identification documents to your government. She appears to be a refugee from a war-torn country. She has been waiting for me to contact her. Tony's mind was spinning. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I was afraid, Zephyr admitted. Afraid that once she arrived, everything would change. That I would lose the life I had built here with you. But she's your mate. You love her. I do. But I also love you, my friend. In my culture, we do not have a word for what you have given me. The closest translation would be soul bond. You are my brother in all but blood. Tony sat down hard in his chair. So what happens now? Now I must make preparations. I am dying. Tony, there's no changing that. But I can control what happens to the things I leave behind. What things? Zephyr pulled out another device from the box. I have been very busy during my time on Earth. I have been learning about your financial systems, your stock markets, your investment opportunities. I don't understand. I use my knowledge of technology and future trends to make investments. I created several business entities using false identities. I have been accumulating wealth. Tony stared at the device in Zephyr's hands. How much wealth? Approximately $57 million. Tony's chair nearly tipped over. $57 million. How is that possible? When you can predict which technologies will succeed and which will fail, making money becomes relatively simple. I invested in companies that I knew would develop breakthrough products. I bought cryptocurrency before it became popular. I even filed patents for improvements to existing technologies. But why? Because I wanted to leave something behind for the person who saved my life. All of this money is legally yours, Tony. I have created documents that make you the sole heir to everything I have accumulated. Tony couldn't speak. The numbers were too big to understand. But that is not all. Zephyr continued. Lyra will need someone to take care of her after I am gone. She understands human culture, but she does not understand human emotions the way I have learned to. She will need a friend, a protector, someone who can help her navigate this world. You want me to take care of her. I want you to be her friend, the way you have been mine, and according to the legal documents I have created. You will also be her husband. Tony jumped up from his chair. Her what? It is the only way to ensure she can stay on Earth legally. The documents show that you and she were married before my arrival, as my cousin. You introduced her to me, and we became close friends. Now that I am dying, she will return to her legal husband. Tony paced around the small apartment. This is crazy. You can't just arrange for me to marry someone I've never met. You will meet her tomorrow, Zephyr said calmly. She is staying in a hotel in the next town. I have arranged for her to come here. What if we don't like each other? You will, Zephyr said with certainty. She is curious about humans the way I was. She wants to learn about emotions, about friendship, about the way you think and feel. And you will be fascinated by her intelligence and her perspective on the universe. Tony sat back down, his head spinning. This is all happening too fast. Time is something I do not have, Zephyr said gently. I need to know that both of you will be taken care of after I am gone. This is the only way I can ensure that. What about what we want? What if Lyra doesn't want to stay on Earth? She does. We have discussed this many times. She wants to continue the work I started here. She wants to help bridge the gap between our peoples, to prepare humans for eventual contact with other civilizations. Tony looked at his friend, seeing the hope and fear in his large eyes. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I have tried to, but I cannot control the most important thing. What's that? Whether you and Lyra will find the same friendship that you and I have shared, that is something that must grow naturally the way it did between us. Tony was quiet for a long time, thinking about everything Zephyr had told him. Finally, he looked up at his friend. When do I meet her? Tomorrow. At sunset, she will come to the shop. And then we begin the most important phase of our friendship, helping people from different worlds learn to care for each other. Tony nodded slowly. Okay, but I have one condition. What? We spend every remaining day together. No more secrets. No more hiding things from me. If you're dying, I want to be with you every step of the way. Zephyr smiled, and for a moment, his face had some of its old glow. I would like that very much, my friend. Neither of them slept much that night, both thinking about the woman who would arrive tomorrow and change their lives forever. The next evening came too quickly. Tony spent the whole day nervous, checking the clock every few minutes. Zephyr seemed calmer, but Tony could see the excitement in his friend's eyes. After 2 years of separation, he was finally going to sea. His mate again died at exactly sunset. A taxi pulled up outside the shop. Tony watched from the window as a woman stepped out, even from a distance. He could tell she was beautiful, but there was something different about her. She moved with the same unusual grace that Zephyr had when he first arrived on Earth. The woman walked toward the shop with confident steps. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with long dark hair and pale skin that seemed to glow slightly in the evening light. She wore simple clothes, jeans, and a sweater, but somehow looked elegant in them. Tony opened the door before she could knock. Up close, her eyes were just like Zephyr's, large and deep, but a lighter shade. She looked at Tony for a moment, studying his face. "You are Tony," she said. Her voice had a musical quality to it, and like Zephyr, she spoke with perfect English, but an accent that didn't quite belong to any country on Earth. "And you're Lyra," Tony replied. Feeling awkward, "Come in." She stepped into the shop and immediately looked around, taking in every detail. "This is where he has been living." "Upstairs," Tony said, pointing toward the apartment. "He's waiting for you." Lyra nodded and walked toward the stairs. Tony followed, not sure what else to do. At the top of the stairs, she stopped. Zephyr was sitting on the couch, and when he saw her, his whole face lit up. They spoke to each other in their own language, words that sounded like music and wind chimes. Tony couldn't understand what they were saying, but he could feel the emotion in their voices. Lyra rushed to Zephyr and held him gently, as if she was afraid he might break. Tony felt like he was intruding on something private. "I'll give you some time alone," he said, turning to leave. "No," Zephyr said in English. "Please stay. Lyra wants to meet you properly." Lyra looked at Tony with those deep eyes. "Zephyr has told me much about you, Tony Rodriguez. You saved his life, and you have given him something my people rarely experience." "What's that?" "True friendship. We have companions and family bonds, but the connection you two have created is special, even by our standards." Tony didn't know what to say to that. "He's been a good friend to me too." Over the next hour, Tony watched Zephyr and Lyra together. They clearly loved each other deeply, but Tony could see the sadness in both their faces. They knew their time together would be short. Lyra examined Zephyr carefully, running her hands over his arms and face. Tony remembered that Zephyr had said she was some kind of healer. "How long?" she asked quietly. "Weeks, perhaps days," Zephyr replied. Lyra closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, she looked at Tony. "He has told me about the arrangements he has made." Tony felt his stomach tighten. "About the money and the legal stuff." "Yes, and about us." Tony looked back and forth between them. "Look, I know this is all really complicated. We don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with." Lyra tilted her head, studying him. "You would give up a fortune to avoid an unwanted responsibility. It's not about the money." Tony said, "Well, okay, the money is completely crazy and I still can't believe it's real. But I don't want you to feel trapped or forced into anything. And if I choose to leave Earth after Zephyr dies, if I decide to find a way back to my home world." Tony thought about it. "Then I'd help you do that." Whatever you want. Lyra and Zephyr exchanged a look. She said something to him in their language, and he nodded. I have been studying your culture for months. Lyra said to Tony, I know about marriage, about your customs and laws. What Zephyr is proposing is not real marriage as humans understand it. Then what is it? Partnership, protection, friendship, if we are fortunate enough to develop it. And if we don't, what if we can't stand each other for the first time? Lyra smiled. It transformed her whole face, making her look younger and more human. Then we will have very interesting problems to solve. Despite everything, Tony found himself smiling back. You have a point there. The next few days were strange and wonderful and heartbreaking all at once. Zephyr was getting weaker, but having Lyra there seemed to give him energy. The three of them spent their time talking, sharing stories, and preparing for what was coming. Lyra was fascinating to talk to. She knew things about science and technology that were centuries ahead of human knowledge. But she was curious about the simplest human experiences. She wanted to know why people cried at movies, why they kept pets, why they decorated their homes with flowers. Your species finds beauty in impermanence. She observed one evening as they watched the sunset from the shop's roof. You create art because you know it will not last forever. You love deeply because you know life is short. Is that bad, Tony asked. No, she said softly. It is remarkable. My people live much longer than humans. We have lost the ability to appreciate moments like this. Tony was starting to understand why Zephyr had fallen in love with human culture. There was something beautiful about the way Lyra saw ordinary things as miracles. But the legal complications of Tony's new situation were becoming real problems. The IRS had started asking questions about his sudden financial success. Tony's accountant wanted to know where all the money was coming from. Distant relatives Tony hadn't heard from in years were suddenly calling to check on him. This is getting complicated, Tony told Zephyr one morning. People are starting to notice. That is why the marriage documentation is so important, Zephyr explained. It provides a legal explanation for everything. Lyra inherited money from her family before the war in her supposed home country. When you married her, her assets became yours as well. And people will believe that? The documentation is perfect. I spent months creating a complete background for her. Tony looked at the papers Zephyr had prepared. There were marriage certificates, bank records, even photographs that somehow showed Tony and Lyra together at their supposed wedding. The technology that created these fake documents was beyond anything Tony could understand. This is incredible, Tony said, flipping through the papers, but also kind of terrifying. If you can fake all this, what's real anymore? The friendship between us is real, Zephyr said. The love between Lyra and me is real. The choice you made to save my life was real. Everything else is just paperwork. A week later, Tony was officially one of the richest people in Nevada. The money had been transferred into accounts with his name on them. Lyra was legally his wife. And Zephyr was dying. Tony had never felt so overwhelmed in his life. He had gone from being a broke mechanic to being a millionaire with an alien wife and a dying best friend. Some days he woke up hoping it was all a crazy dream. But when he looked at Zephyr, getting weaker every day, and Lyra, trying to be strong for both of them, Tony knew that none of this was about money or legal documents. It was about family, the strangest, most impossible family anyone had ever had. But family nonetheless. Are you ready for this? Zephyr asked Tony one evening as they sat together while Lyra slept. Ready for what? Being rich, being married to someone I barely know, watching my best friend die. Which part should I be ready for? Zephyr smiled weakly. Ready to take care of someone the way you took care of me. Tony looked at his friend, this amazing being who had changed his life completely. I'll do my best. I know you will, Zephyr said. That is why I chose you. 3 days later, Zephyr died peacefully in his sleep, holding Lyra's hand while Tony sat beside them. His body dissolved into a fine, glittering powder, just as he had told Tony it would. They scattered the powder in the desert where they had first met, as Zephyr had requested, and then Tony and Lyra were alone together, two people from different worlds. trying to figure out how to build a life from the most impossible circumstances anyone could imagine. The first month after Zephyr's death was the hardest time in Tony's life. The shop felt empty without his friend's presence, even though Lyra was there, living in the apartment upstairs. They were both lost in their own grief. Lyra barely spoke for weeks. She would sit by the window for hours, staring at the desert where they had scattered Zephyr's remains. Sometimes Tony would hear her crying at night, and his heart would break for her. But he didn't know how to comfort someone whose pain was so different from anything he had ever experienced. The money made everything more complicated. Tony had never imagined having so much wealth, and he had no idea what to do with it. Financial advisors kept calling. Lawyers wanted to meet with him. The IRS sent letters that made his hands shake when he opened them. "I don't know how to handle all this," Tony told Lyra one morning over breakfast. She had been picking at her food, eating just enough to survive. "Zephyr believed you would figure it out," she said quietly. It was the first time she had spoken Zephyr's name since he died. "He had a lot more faith in me than I have in myself." Lyra looked at him with those deep eyes. "He told me you were the kind of person who rises to meet challenges, even when you do not believe you can. What about you? How are you handling all this?" "I am surviving," she said. "That is all I can do right now." Tony understood that feeling. Some days, surviving was enough. Slowly, over the next few weeks, they began to talk more. Lyra started helping Tony understand the financial documents Zephyr had left behind. She was incredibly smart, able to explain complex legal and business concepts in ways that made sense to Tony. "Your friend was very thorough," she said one evening as they went through papers together. "Every detail has been planned perfectly, including us." Tony asked. Lyra was quiet. "For a moment. He told me much about you during our communications. He believed we would be compatible." "And what do you think?" "I think he was right about many things. But friendship cannot be arranged, even by someone as wise as Zephyr. It must grow naturally." Tony nodded. "No pressure, right?" For the first time in weeks, Lyra almost smiled. No pressure. As the months passed, they did become friends. It happened gradually, the way real friendship always does. They started eating meals together regularly. Tony taught Lyra how to drive, which was an adventure since she kept trying to apply alien logic to human traffic laws. "Why do you stop at red lights when no other cars are coming?" she asked during one of their practice sessions. "Because those are the rules," Tony explained. "But the rules make no sense in that situation." "Welcome to Earth," Tony said, laughing. "Half our rules don't make sense." Lyra was fascinated by human culture, but she was also homesick in ways that Tony couldn't fully understand. Sometimes, she would tell him stories about her homeworld, about the cities that floated in the clouds and the gardens that grew without soil. "Do you ever want to go back?" Tony asked one evening as they sat on the shop's roof, looking at the stars. "Every day," she said honestly. "But I cannot. The journey here was one way. And even if I could return, I have a purpose here now." "What purpose?" Zephyr was part of a long-term study of human civilization. He gathered information that was supposed to be shared with our people. Now that responsibility falls to me. "So you're like a spy?" "More like a scientist. We are trying to understand your species, to determine if contact between our peoples would be beneficial or dangerous." Tony thought about that. "And what have you determined?" "That humans are far more complex than we originally believed. You are capable of both great kindness and terrible cruelty, often within the same individual. Is that good or bad?" "It is honest," Lyra said. "My people have become very predictable over the centuries. We have lost much of our emotional range. Humans still feel everything deeply, even when it hurts." Zephyr said something similar once. "He changed because of his time with you. He learned to feel the way humans feel. It made him happier, but it also made his death more painful." They sat in comfortable silence, both thinking about their lost friend. As time went on, Tony realized his feelings for Lyra were changing. It wasn't the same as his love for Zephyr, which had been pure friendship. This was something deeper, more complicated. He was falling in love with her, But he felt guilty about it. Is it wrong? He asked Lyra one day. They had been working together in the shop, and Tony had caught himself staring at her as she bent over an engine. Is what wrong? The way I'm starting to feel about you. Zephyr was my best friend, and you were his mate. It feels like I'm betraying him. Lyra stopped what she was doing and looked at him. In my culture, when a bonded pair is separated by death, it is considered natural for the surviving mate to bond with their departed partner's closest friend. Really? Zephyr knew this might happen. He hoped it would happen. He told me that if we were to develop feelings for each other, it would honor his memory rather than dishonor it. Tony felt a weight lift from his shoulders, so he planned. This too. He hoped for it, but he could not force it. Love cannot be arranged, only encouraged. Their relationship changed after that conversation. They stopped being careful around each other. Tony could admit his growing feelings, and Lyra could acknowledge that she was beginning to care for him in ways that surprised her. The first time they kissed was on a warm evening in the desert, standing in the spot where Tony had first found Zephyr's ship. It felt right, like completing a circle that had started that night too. Years ago, Zephyr would be happy, Lyra whispered. Against Tony's lips, I hope so. Tony said, I love you, but I'll never stop missing him. Good, Lyra said. Love should not erase love, it should add to it. With their personal relationship settling into something beautiful, Tony and Lyra turned their attention to the fortune Zephyr had left them. They decided to use the money to start a foundation dedicated to technological research and development. We'll call it the Clearwater Foundation, Tony suggested, after our town. What will our mission be? Lyra asked. Advancing human technology in ways that will prepare your people for eventual contact with other civilizations. Just like Zephyr wanted. Lyra smiled. He would love that. The foundation became their shared passion. Lyra's knowledge of advanced science, combined with Tony's practical understanding of human nature, made them an effective team. They funded research into clean energy, space exploration, and communication technology publicly. They were just a wealthy couple who had gotten lucky with investments privately. They were preparing humanity for a future that most people couldn't imagine. Tony's life had become something out of a science fiction movie, but it felt completely natural now. He woke up every morning next to a woman from another world. He spent his days working on projects that could change the future of both their species. He went to sleep each night grateful for the friend who had made it all possible. Sometimes, late at night, Tony would look up at the stars and think about Zephyr. He would remember that night in the desert, the decision to help a stranger, and how that choice had led to the most extraordinary life he could have imagined. Thank you, buddy, he would whisper to the sky, for everything. And somehow, Tony always felt like Zephyr was listening, somewhere among the stars, proud of what his two favorite people had built. Together, love beyond the stars, friendship beyond death, and hope beyond the boundaries of worlds.